The forgotten Orb of Ercys, the only hope against the coming darkness. Galen felt the encroaching shadow of Salak as they neared the murk of Zyre. Lissa gripped her weapon, eyes scanning the toxic, crumbling structures ahead. The air grew thick and acrid, heavy with the scent of decay and something far fouler, something that clawed at the edges of the mind. Kaelin felt it like a physical weight pressing down, the tangible presence of the shadow of Silak intensifying with every step they took deeper into the jagged maw of the murk of Zyre. The ground beneath their worn boots was no longer solid earth, but a treacherous mix of fine, choking dust and larger, brittle chunks of what looked like petrified bone or crumbling stone. Lissa walked ahead, her movements fluid and wary, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, constantly sweeping across the desolate, broken landscape. Her hand rested instinctively on the hilt of her short sword, a silent promise of swift action should danger manifest from the gloom. Behind them trailed two others who had joined their desperate venture from the fragile safety of Ethelberg. Bram, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard years and harder choices, moved with a slow, deliberate gait, his gaze fixed on the immediate path ahead. He was a former scout, one of the few who had ever ventured even a short distance into the murk and returned, carrying with him pages of impossible odds and a deep-seated distrust of anything that moved within its borders. His silence was more unnerving than any shout, a constant reminder of the perils they faced. Beside him walked Ilara, cloaked and quiet, her eyes, wide and often distant, seemed to see things beyond the physical desolation. She was a scholar, not a warrior, her strength residing in forgotten knowledge of ancient Vexia and the legends that whispered of the Orb of Ercys and its hidden resting place. She clutched a leather-bound journal to her chest, its pages filled with faded script and hurried notes. The transition from the harsh but familiar plains bordering the murk was abrupt and disorienting. One moment they were treading on hard, dry ground. The next they were sinking slightly into the unsettling dust, the air itself feeling hostile. The crumbling structures Lissa had scanned were now upon them, hulking, skeletal remains of buildings that once stood proud. They were made of dark, unfamiliar stone, eroded by time and perhaps something more insidious. Jagged spires pointed accusingly at the perpetually overcast sky, and doorways gaped like hungry mouths into suffocating darkness. "Stay close," Lissa murmured, her voice barely a whisper but carrying authority that made Kaelin and the others instinctively tighten their formation. The dust shifts, and the air ... She trailed off, coughing lightly into her hand. Kaelin felt the burn in his own lungs, a metallic taste coating his tongue. The air was not only thick, but carried a faint, noxious scent, like burnt chemicals and something organic rotting for centuries. He'd pulled a strip of cloth tighter over his mouth and nose, a meager defense against the pervasive toxicity. Bram, already wrapped in a similar cloth, merely grunted in agreement, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the higher ruins. Elara, her face pale beneath the hood of her cloak, seemed to retreat further into herself, her grip on the journal tightening. They navigated a narrow passage between two leaning towers that looked ready to collapse at any moment. The dust here was deeper, swirling around their ankles with every step, disturbed motes catching the faint, diffused light that filtered through the poisoned atmosphere. Strange, gnarled growths clung to the crumbling walls, not plants in any recognizable sense, but twisted, dark forms that seemed to pulse faintly with an unnatural energy. "Don't touch anything," Bram warned, his voice raspy. "Some of that ... stuff ... bites." Kalen nodded, keeping his hands tucked close. His initial naivety was being rapidly eroded by the sheer oppressive reality of the murk. This was not just a dangerous place. It felt actively wrong, a wound in the world festering under the influence of the shadow. He could feel its presence like a cold dread settling in his stomach, a constant whisper of despair and emptiness. It wasn't just the environment. It felt like the very fabric of existence here was tainted. They moved slowly, cautiously. Lys's tracking skills, honed in the wild lands bordering Vexia, were put to a different test here. There were no animal tracks, no disturbed earth in the conventional sense. Instead, she was looking for subtle signs of passage, shifts in the dust that weren't caused by the wind, unnatural disturbances among the gnarled growths, or vibrations felt through the ground. "Someone or something has been this way recently," Lysa said, pointing to a place where the dust seemed to have settled unevenly over a footprint too defined to be natural. Heading deeper in, cultists, Bram spat the word like venom. Or worse, things the shadow twists. They crawl out of the dark places when it stirs. Elara finally spoke, her voice soft but surprisingly clear in the heavy air. The texts speak of aberrations, creatures reshaped by Selok's influence during the first stirring. They are not creatures of nature, but perversions. Kalen felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard Thales and Ethelberg, hushed whispers of things that stalk the edge of the murk, but hearing Elara speak of them with such quiet certainty made them terrifyingly real. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, a simple, well-balanced blade, feeling utterly inadequate compared to the ancient, pervasive evil they were facing. They continued, the ruins growing more frequent and more imposing. They passed through what might have been a public square, its paving stones cracked and uneven, a broken statue of a forgotten hero lying face down in the dust. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the occasional gust of wind that stirred the toxic dust into blinding clouds. They reached a point where the path forward seemed blocked by a massive pile of rubble, the remains of a collapsed building. Lysa immediately began scanning the debris, looking for a way over or around. Bram tested the stability of the rubble with his boot, his brow furrowed. "Looks unstable," he warned. "One wrong step, and that whole pile could come down." Elara, however, was looking at something else. She pointed a trembling finger towards a dark opening beneath a massive, tilted slab of stone. Threa passage? It seems like a cellar entrance. Lissa moved cautiously towards it, kneeling to examine the opening. The air emanating from it was even fouler than the surrounding murk air, thick with the scent of stagnation and something else, a faint metallic tang. Could be a way through, she said, standing up, but it's dark and tight. We don't know what's down there. Probably better than trying to climb that, Bram said, gesturing at the precarious rubble pile. If it holds... Kalen felt a prickle of unease. The passage looked like the mouth of a deeper darkness, but the alternative seemed equally, if not more, dangerous. We need to keep moving, he said, his voice slightly hoarse from the air. If this is the only way... Lissa nodded. Bram, you take point. You know how to move in tight spaces. Elara, you stay between Kalen and me. Kalen, you're in the middle. I'll take the rear. Bram gave a curt nod, unsheathing a heavy knife. He crouched and carefully entered the dark opening, his figure quickly swallowed by the gloom. A moment later, his voice echoed faintly, clear, for now. Smells bad, though. One by one, they followed. Kalen ducked his head, the air immediately becoming heavier, colder. The passage was indeed narrow, the walls rough-hewn stone slick with a greasy film. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of the small lamp Lissa ignited at the rear. It cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. They moved slowly, their breathing loud in the confined space. The floor was uneven, strewn with debris and pools of stagnant water that emitted foul odors. Kalen kept one hand on the cold, slimy wall to steady himself, the other near his sword. The feeling of being enclosed, combined with the oppressive atmosphere and the lurking presence of the shadow, was deeply unsettling. The legends speak of the lower levels of Vexia's cities. Elara whispered from beside him, her voice trembling slightly. They were built upon layers of the past, each generation adding to the height. The deepest levels. They are said to touch the very roots of the world, where the shadow's influence is strongest. Cheery thought, Bram muttered from ahead. They continued deeper into the underground passage. The passage branched occasionally, and Lissa would pause, examining the floor and the air currents before indicating which way to go. Her senses were finely tuned, picking up cues Kalen would have entirely missed. After what felt like an hour of navigating the oppressive darkness, they emerged into a larger chamber. The air here was slightly better, though still heavy, and the chamber was partially lit by a faint, ethereal luminescence that seemed to seep from the stone itself. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with niches that once might have held statues or artifacts. Now they were empty, or filled with the same gnarled, pulsing growths they had seen outside. In the center of the chamber stood a single large pedestal made of dark, polished stone. Upon it rested nothing but a layer of dust. What is this place? Kalen asked, his voice echoing strangely. A repository, perhaps, Elara said, moving closer to the pedestal. Or a ritual site. See the symbols on the walls? She pointed to faint carvings beneath the growths. They are ancient Vexian runes. I recognize some. They speak of guardianship, of warding, and of something lost. As Elara examined the runes, Bram began to scout the edges of the chamber, his knife held ready. Lissa kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, her back to the entrance they had used. Kaelin stood near Elara, trying to decipher the faint symbols, feeling a strange resonance from them, a faint echo of power long gone. Suddenly Bram hissed, "Company." Lissa spun around, sword drawn. Kellen's hand flew to his own hilt. From the darkest corners of the chamber, indistinct shapes began to stir. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their forms shrouded in shadow. As they shuffled closer, the faint light revealed twisted, gaunt figures, their limbs elongated and jointed wrong, their faces sunken and devoid of expression, replaced by gaping maws or empty sockets. They were the aberrations Elara had spoken of, creatures molded by the shadow's touch. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, lurching towards the group. They emitted no sound, only a low, guttural scraping as they moved. "Stay together," Lissa ordered, positioning herself defensively. Bram met the first creature with surprising speed, his knife slashing through its shadowy form. It didn't bleed, but parts of it seemed to dissipate like smoke before it reformed slightly. These were not easy foes to kill. Kaelin drew his sword, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced bandits and wild animals, but these were different. They felt like embodiments of the gloom itself. One lunged at him, its long, spindly arms reaching. Kaelin parried clumsily, the creature's touch feeling like icy fire where it brushed his blade. Lissa fought with brutal efficiency, her movements swift and precise, targeting vulnerable points Kaelin couldn't even identify. Elara retreated towards the pedestal, her eyes wide with terror, clutching her journal. "Kaelin, to your left," Lissa shouted. He whipped around just as another aberration scrabbled towards him along the wall. He swung his sword, connecting with its arm. The creature let out a silent, rasping sound and recoiled. Bram was holding his own against 2 of the creatures, his movements economical, his knife finding weak points in their shadowy forms. But more seemed to be emerging from the shadows in the niches. The fight was desperate and chaotic in the flickering light. Kaelin parried and thrust, his earlier clumsiness giving way to a frantic need for survival. He felt the oppressive weight of the shadow intensify as the creatures pressed in, a wave of despair threatening to engulf him. He had to push it back, fight through it. This was the shadow, manifesting physically, trying to stop them. He saw one creature lurching towards Elara, who was cornered against the pedestal. Without thinking, Kaelin lunged, intercepting the aberration. He swung his sword with all his might, and this time, instead of merely reforming, the creature shrieked a silent, agonizing cry and dissolved completely into black smoke that quickly dissipated. He stared at the spot where it had been, surprised. What had he done differently? There was no time to dwell on it. The remaining creatures renewed their assault. Lissa called out. They react to light. The lamp. Realizing their vulnerability, Lissa held the lamp higher, casting more light into the corners. The creatures seemed to flinch from the direct light, their movements becoming more hesitant. Using this to their advantage, Lissa maneuvered the lamp, directing the light towards the creatures as Kalen and Bram pressed the attack. Bram's knife was coated in a strange, shimmering residue from where he'd struck the creatures. Kalen found that focusing his intent, a raw, desperate refusal to yield to the gloom, seemed to make his blows more effective. It wasn't just swinging his sword. It was swinging it with every fiber of his being, rejecting the shadow. Slowly, painstakingly, they managed to defeat the remaining aberrations. They didn't fall. They simply dissolved into smoke, leaving behind only the foul stench and a deepening sense of dread in the air. They stood panting in the uneasy quiet that followed, the only sound their ragged breathing and the faint, distant echo of the murk outside. Lissa lowered the lamp slightly, her eyes still scanning the niches. Bram wiped his knife clean on a piece of cloth, his face grim. Elara, still trembling, slowly sank to the floor beside the pedestal, burying her face in her hands. "Are they all gone?" Kalen asked, his voice trembling slightly. "For now," Lissa replied, her gaze sharp. "More could come." "This place, it feels like a nest. The shadow draws them," Bram added, sheathing his knife. "It gives them form here." Elara looked up, her eyes wide and haunted. "The runes. They speak of this chamber being a seal placed long ago to contain something the shadow seeks to unleash." Kalen looked around the chamber again. The empty niches, the central pedestal, the ancient runes partially obscured by the pulsing growths. It felt less like a repository now and more like a prison or a binding site. What was sealed here? Lissa asked, her voice tight with caution. Elara shook her head. "The language is archaic, fragmented. It's unclear, but the seal is weakening. The growths, they are part of the shadow's effort to break it." Kalen walked towards the pedestal again, drawn by an unseen force. He reached out a hand, hovering it just above the dusty surface. He felt a faint hum of energy, cold and ancient. This was not the orb. He knew that instinctively, but this place was connected to the power they sought and the power they fought against. "We can't stay here," Lissa said, urgency in her voice. "We've drawn attention. We need to find the next passage." They searched the chamber walls, Lissa and Bram testing for hidden mechanisms, Kalen running his hands over the stone, Elara consulting her journal, looking for clues in the runes. It was Elara who found it, pointing to a section of the wall where the runes were particularly dense. "Here," she said. "It speaks of a passage hidden behind the Guardian's eye. But there is no Guardian here now." Lissa examined the section of wall. Maybe the pedestal was the Guardian, or held it. Bram ran his hand over the stone near where Elara pointed. "Feels solid. No seams." Kalen felt a strange pull towards a specific spot on the wall near the runes Elara had indicated. It was just a section of bare stone, indistinguishable from the rest, yet it felt different to him, like a cold spot in a warm room. He placed his hand against it. Nothing happened for a moment. and then he felt a faint vibration, like a pulse beneath the stone. "Here," he said, pressing harder. "There's something here." He concentrated, focusing the strange feeling he had experienced earlier, the one that had made his sword effective against the aberration. It wasn't anger or even determination, but a pure white-hot refusal to accept the shadow's dominion. He pushed that feeling into the stone. With a low grinding sound, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing another dark passage beyond. The air from it was different again, less foul than the cellar they had entered through, but colder, carrying a faint scent of damp stone and something metallic, like old blood. Lissa immediately moved towards the opening, peering into the darkness. "Looks like a tunnel. Hand me the lamp." She took the lamp from Kalen and held it aloft, casting its weak light into the tunnel. It sloped downwards, the walls rougher than the passage they had come through. "This way then," she said, stepping through the opening. Bram followed. Then Elara, her face still pale, but her scholarly curiosity evident as she peered at the newly revealed passage. Kalen paused at the threshold, looking back at the silent, eerie chamber. The pedestal stood empty, the niches dark, the growths on the walls seeming to pulse more aggressively now that the seal was disturbed. He felt a profound sense of unease, a feeling that they had just stepped closer to something ancient and terrible, something that had been sleeping and was now stirring. He turned and followed his companions into the descending tunnel. The air grew colder with every step, and the faint metallic smell intensified. The lamp's light struggled to push back the oppressive darkness that seemed to cling to the walls. The tunnel twisted and turned, the descent becoming steeper. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooling in shallow depressions on the floor. "Feels like we're going deep underground," Bram observed, his voice echoing. "Further than the city's foundations should go." The ancient text described the lowest levels of Vexia as reaching towards the heart of the world, Elara said, her voice hushed. "A place of immense power, both creative and destructive." Kalen felt the familiar pressure of the shadow, but here it felt different, more concentrated, like a physical force pressing in on them from all sides. It was colder here too, a chilling cold that seeped into his bones despite his movements. He could feel the despair, the emptiness, the seductive whisper of surrender that the shadow always carried, amplified tenfold in this deep place. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe, to keep moving. The tunnel eventually widened, opening into another vast, cavernous space. Unlike the previous chamber, this one was not carved stone, but seemed to be a natural cave system, albeit one that had been significantly altered. Massive, rough-hewn pillars supported the ceiling, and strange, crystalline formations sprouted from the floor and walls, catching the lamp light and refracting it into unsettling, distorted patterns. The metallic smell was stronger here, thick and coppery. In the center of the cavern was a large, dark pool of water, its surface unnervingly still. The water itself seemed to absorb the light, remaining stubbornly black even where the lamp shone directly on it. A faint mist rose from the surface, carrying the strong, metallic scent. "What is this?" Kalen asked, feeling a sense of dread wash over him. "The blood lake," Elara whispered, her eyes fixed on the dark water. or so the legends call it. Said to be fed by the veins of the earth, where ancient power flows. Bram approached the edge of the pool cautiously, tossing a small stone into the water. There was no splash, no ripple, just a faint plink as the stone vanished beneath the surface. "Doesn't act like water," Bram said, his voice low, too ... heavy. Lissa was scanning the cavern, her lamp light playing over the crystalline formations. "There's a passage on the far side," she said, pointing. "Looks like it leads deeper." To reach the passage, they would have to cross the cavern, navigating around the strange crystals and skirting the edge of the dark pool. The air in the cavern was heavy, and the omnipresent pressure of the shadow felt like a physical weight on their shoulders. Kaelin felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that this place was not just dangerous, but actively hostile. As they began to move across the cavern, following Lissa's lead, the crystalline formations seemed to react to their presence. A low hum began to emanate from them, growing steadily in intensity. The light they refracted became more erratic, flashing and flickering, casting distorted shadows that danced on the walls. Then, from the surface of the dark pool, ripples began to spread, not from anything falling into it, but from within. The water stirred slowly at first, then more rapidly. The metallic smell intensified, becoming almost overwhelming. "Something's in the water," Bram said, drawing his knife again. Kaelin stared at the pool, his heart pounding. The ripples grew larger, and the surface began to churn. A shape was rising from the depths, dark and indistinct in the gloom. It broke the surface with a viscous, sickening sound, not a splash, but a heavy, dragging emergence. It was huge, a mass of dark, glistening flesh and bone, twisted and malformed. It had multiple limbs that thrashed in the air, ending in razor-sharp claws. A gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth opened in what might have been its head, and it emitted a low, gurgling roar that vibrated through the cavern. It was an aberration of monstrous scale, a creature born from the corrupted power of the blood lake and the influence of the shadow. "Run!" Lissa yelled, her voice urgent, to the passage. They turned and ran, scrambling over the uneven ground and around the sharp crystals. The creature from the lake was surprisingly fast, propelling itself forward with its many limbs, its bulk sliding across the cavern floor. The air filled with the sound of its rasping breath and the scraping of its claws on stone. Kaelin risked a glance back. The monster was gaining on them. Elara stumbled, her cloak catching on a crystal formation. Kaelin grabbed her arm, pulling her upright, urging her forward. Lissa and Bram were closer to the passage, trying to hold the monster back, diverting its attention. Lissa slashed at one of its limbs, the blow glancing off its tough hide. Bram threw his knife, embedding it in the creature's flesh, but it seemed to have little effect. "Keep going," Lissa shouted to Kaelin and Elara. "We'll cover you." Kaelin hesitated for a split second, wanting to help, but he knew Lissa was right. Elara was not built for speed or combat, and getting her to safety was paramount. He pulled Elara towards the dark opening of the passage, the monstrous roars echoing behind them. They reached the passage entrance, diving into the relative safety of the narrow tunnel. Kaelin looked back one last time. Lissa and Bram were retreating into the passage, just ahead of the massive creature, its gaping maw filling the opening of the cavern. "Go!" Bram yelled, his voice strained. They plunged into the darkness of the passage, the roars of the monster following them, deafening in the confined space. Caitlin could hear the sounds of fighting behind them, the clash of steel against flesh, Bram's grunts, Lissa's sharp cries. He pushed Elara forward, urging her deeper into the tunnel. The passage here was different again, carved with strange, geometric patterns that pulsed faintly with the same ethereal luminescence as the previous chamber, but stronger now. It felt like they were moving through something deliberately constructed, something ancient and powerful, the architects, the builders of ancient Vexia. Elara gasped, her voice trembling. They knew this place, they built paths through it. The tunnel began to descend even more steeply. Caitlin could still hear the sounds of the fight behind them, but they were fading, growing muffled by the stone and the distance. A cold knot of fear tightened in his stomach. Had Lissa and Bram made it, or were they facing the monstrous aberration alone? He pushed the thought away, focusing on getting Elara to safety. The descent was difficult, the floor uneven and slick. The strange geometric patterns on the walls seemed to shift and flow in his peripheral vision, confusing his sense of direction. The pressure of the shadow was immense here, a crushing weight that made his head ache and his vision blur at the edges. "Are you all right?" he asked Elara, who was stumbling beside him. "Just ... the air," she panted, and the ... pressure. They continued their hurried descent. The sounds of the fight were gone now, replaced by an unnerving silence that was punctuated only by their ragged breathing and the faint hum of the glowing patterns on the walls. Caitlin felt a surge of fear for Lissa and Bram, but he had to trust them. They were resourceful, skilled. They had survived worse. He hoped. The passage finally leveled out, opening into another chamber. This one was smaller than the previous ones, circular, and entirely lined with the glowing geometric patterns. In the center of the chamber was a raised platform, and on the platform, resting on a simple stone pedestal, was a single object. It wasn't the Orb of Ercys, not the glowing sphere of pure light he had imagined from the legends. It was a faceted stone, dark and dull, absorbing the faint light rather than reflecting it. It looked utterly unremarkable, like a lump of obsidian, but Caitlin felt an immediate, powerful connection to it. It hummed with a deep, resonant energy that vibrated through his very bones. It felt like the heart of this terrible place, a focal point for the ancient power Elara had spoken of. As they stepped fully into the chamber, the glowing patterns on the walls intensified, casting a brighter, pulsating light. The pressure of the shadow, which had been immense in the passage, seemed to lessen slightly in this chamber, though it was still present, lurking at the edges. Elara gasped, moving towards the pedestal. This ... This must be it, or connected to it. The Heart Stone. The texts speak of the Orb of Ercys, being hidden within a place of immense power. Protected by the Heartstone, Kalen approached the pedestal, his eyes fixed on the dark, dull stone. He reached out a trembling hand, hesitant to touch it. He could feel the energy radiating from it, complex and ancient, not inherently good or evil, but raw power. Before he could touch it, a sound echoed from the passage they had just come through, a scraping, dragging sound followed by a low growl. Kalen and Elara froze, their eyes fixed on the passage entrance. A figure emerged from the darkness, limping, one arm hanging uselessly at its side. It was Bram, his clothes torn, blood staining his face and arm. Behind him, leaning heavily against him, was Lissa, her face pale, clutching her side. "Lissa, Bram," Kalen cried, rushing towards them. "It's still coming," Bram gasped, collapsing onto the floor, clutching his injured arm. "That thing ... det. It's relentless." Lissa slid down the wall, wincing in pain. "We slowed it down, collapsed the passage behind us, but I don't know how long it will hold." She looked at the dark stone on the pedestal. "Is that ... "We think so," Kalen said, his gaze flicking between the stone and the passage entrance. The scraping sound was growing louder, closer. The monster had found a way through the collapsed passage, or was simply powerful enough to force its way. They were trapped. The only way out was the passage they had come through, and the monster was coming. "We have to do something," Elara said, her voice surprisingly steady, her fear replaced by a fierce determination. She looked at the Heartstone. The texts, they say the Heartstone can resonate with the power within a person. If they are true of heart, it can unlock things ... reveal things. Kalen looked at the stone, then back at the passage. The scraping sound was right outside now, followed by a heavy impact against the stone wall that made the chamber tremble. Cracks were appearing in the glowing patterns on the wall near the entrance. There was no time to hesitate. He looked at Lissa, her face etched with pain, but her eyes still sharp and resolute. He looked at Bram, clutching his injured arm, his jaw set in grim determination. He looked at Elara, small and vulnerable, but holding a wealth of knowledge that had guided them this far. He knew what he had to do. This quest wasn't just about finding an object. It was about facing the shadow, about finding the strength to fight back against the encroaching bloom. And somehow he felt that this dark stone was the key. He walked back to the pedestal, the scraping and pounding at the passage entrance growing louder, more frantic. The chamber was shaking now. He could hear the stone groaning under the assault. He stood before the Heartstone, the dull, dark surface seeming to pull at him. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind of fear and doubt. He thought of Ardoria, of the people living under the shadow's threat, of Ethelberg, their last fragile bastion. He thought of Lissa, Bram, Elara, who had risked everything to come with him. He reached out and placed both hands on the Heartstone. It was cold beneath his touch, unnaturally so. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he felt a surge of energy flow from the stone into him, not like a jolt, but like a vast, ancient river filling an empty channel. It was overwhelming, powerful. and it carried with it sensations and images that were not his own. He saw flashes of ancient Vexia, vibrant and alive, then crumbling under a creeping darkness. He saw figures fighting against the gloom, wielding light and power. He saw the Orb of Ercys, not a single object, but a source of immense power, connected to the very lifeblood of Ardoria. And he saw the shadow, a vast, hungry void seeking to consume everything. The energy intensified, flowing through him, resonating with something deep inside him that he hadn't known was there. It felt like a lock being turned, a door being opened within his own being. He cried out, not in pain, but in the sheer intensity of the experience. Lissa and Ilara watched, fear and hope warring on their faces. Bram grit his teeth against the pain in his arm, his eyes fixed on Kaelin. The pounding on the passage entrance stopped abruptly. There was a moment of silence, heavy and pregnant with anticipation. Then a low, guttural snarl filled the air, closer than before. The wall of the passage didn't break. Instead, the glowing patterns on the wall of the chamber itself began to flicker violently. The ground trembled, and a section of the wall near the passage entrance cracked and splintered, revealing not the tunnel, but a dark, swirling vortex of shadow and mist. The monstrous aberration from the lake emerged from the vortex, not through the passage, but as if it had stepped through the very fabric of reality. It was even larger up close, its eyes glowing pinpricks of malevolent light, fixing on Kaelin standing at the pedestal. Kaelin felt the creature's presence like a physical blow, a wave of pure, concentrated malice. But the energy from the heart stone was coursing through him, mingling with that newfound power within himself. He felt a strength he had never known, a clarity of purpose that cut through the fear. He looked at the monster, then at the heartstone. He understood now. This wasn't just a power source. It was a key to something within himself, and perhaps a key to finding the orb. The aberration roared, a sound that was both deafening and seemed to burrow into his mind. It lunged towards him, its claws extended, its maw gaping. Kaelin didn't move. He stood before the pedestal, his hands still on the heartstone, the energy flowing through him, and waited for the inevitable clash. The fate of everything felt balanced on this single, terrifying moment, deep within the corrupted heart of the Murk of Zir. He could feel the shadow's gaze upon him, vast and ancient, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone even as the energy warmed him, that this was only the beginning. The stone pulsed under his touch, a silent promise of power, and a terrifying invitation to delve deeper into the secrets of Ardoria's past and the true nature of the shadow. The glowing patterns on the walls around him pulsed brighter, mirroring the chaotic influx of power. The air crackled with unseen energy. Its bulk was immense, a horrific tapestry of unnatural bone, slick, dark flesh, and appendages that seemed to shift and reform even as he watched. The metallic, coppery stench of the blood lake clung to it, thick and nauseating. The visions from the stone flashed in his mind, the ancient defenders, the raw power of the orb, the all-consuming hunger of the shadow. He understood on a fundamental level that this creature was not merely a beast, but an extension of that hunger, a physical manifestation of Selak's will to corrupt and destroy. He looked at the monster, then at the heart stone beneath his hands, a key to something within himself, a dormant resistance to the shadow, amplified by the ancient energy of Ardoria's core, and perhaps a key to finding the orb, which felt intrinsically linked to the power now flowing through him. It moved with a terrifying speed for its size, its many limbs propelling it across the chamber floor. He stood before the pedestal, his hands still on the heartstone, the energy flowing through him. He didn't draw his sword. Instead, he focused the surging energy, channeling the pure, unyielding refusal of the shadow he had felt earlier, the force that had dissolved the smaller aberrations. He directed it outwards, not as a physical blow, but as a wave of raw, incandescent anti-shadow energy. A pale, shimmering light emanated from Kalen, not bright like a lamp, but a deep inner luminescence that pushed back the ambient gloom of the chamber. As this light washed over the approaching monster, the creature shrieked, a sound of scraping stone and tearing metal that was far worse than its roar. Its dark flesh seemed to recoil, smoking faintly where the light touched it. The pulsing growths on the walls nearest the creature withered and turned to dust. The aberration stumbled, its lunge faltering. It wasn't a physical attack, but an assault on its very being, on the shadow energy that gave it form. Kalen pushed the energy harder, his teeth clenched, his body trembling with the effort. The heartstone pulsed violently under his hands, feeding him the power, but also demanding something from him in return. Focus, will, the absolute commitment to resistance. The monster thrashed, its claws tearing at the stone floor, desperately trying to retreat or strike at the source of the painful light. Its eyes, those malevolent pinpricks, were fixed on Kalen with a new intensity, not just hunger, but hatred. Lissa, despite her injured side, pushed herself up against the wall, her sword ready. Ram, cradling his injured arm, grabbed a heavy chunk of rubble that had fallen from the ceiling, ready to throw it. Elara, her face pale but her eyes blazing with determination, looked from Kalen to the glowing runes on the walls, her lips moving silently, perhaps reciting ancient protective verses. The monster, finding its direct assault repelled, shifted tactics. It reared back slightly, and from the edges of its form, smaller, distorted shapes began to peel away, echoes of the lesser aberrations they had fought before, but faster, more agile. They scuttled around the edge of the light, aiming for Kellen's companions. Alara. Kalen shouted, unable to break his focus on the main creature. Lissa moved with surprising speed, intercepting the first smaller aberration with a flash of steel. Her sword, imbued with a fierce will, cut through the shadowy form, and this one also dissolved into smoke, letting out a silent shriek. Bram, using his good arm, hurled the rubble at another, distracting it just long enough for Lissa to deal with it. But there were more. Two scuttled towards Elara, who cried out and stumbled back against the pedestal. Kalen saw them from the corner of his eye. He couldn't stop the flow of energy to the main monster, but he could direct the peripheral light, the overflow of power radiating from him. He focused his will, sending a ripple of the pale luminescence towards Ilara. As the light touched the smaller aberrations, they too dissolved, faster than the first ones, leaving only wisps of black smoke. The main monster roared again, a sound of frustrated fury. It understood. Kalen wasn't just a target. He was actively disrupting its power, destroying its spawn. It gathered itself, preparing for another lunge, its eyes fixed on Kalen with murderous intent. Kalen knew he couldn't hold the main creature back indefinitely with just the outward flow of energy. The Heartstone was powerful, but it was a key, not an infinite battery, and maintaining this output was draining him, making his muscles ache and his vision swim at the edges. He needed to do something more, something decisive. The visions from the stone returned, sharper this time. He saw the ancient defenders not just repelling the shadow, but binding it, containing it. He saw the orb, not just a weapon, but a source of pure life force, a counterpoint to Selok's void. The Heartstone was connected to this binding, to this balance. He felt a surge of understanding. The stone wasn't just giving him power. It was showing him how to use it, how to interact with the shadow's influence in this place. The glowing patterns on the walls, Ilara's words about a seal. This chamber itself was part of an ancient warding, and the Heartstone was its focus. He took a risk. He maintained his connection to the Heartstone, but shifted his focus from projecting the light outwards to drawing the power inward, concentrating it within himself. The pale light around him diminished slightly, and the monster, sensing the change, pressed its advantage, lunging forward again. Lissa yelled, trying to position herself between him and the creature, her injured side forgotten in the heat of battle. Bram struggled to get to his feet, his face contorted in pain. But Kalen didn't flinch. He held his hands on the stone, drawing the ancient power deep into his core, letting it mingle with the nascent strength he had discovered. He felt it settle there, a burning, radiant presence in his chest. As the monster's massive form loomed over him, its jaws opening to swallow him whole, Kalen lifted his hands from the Heartstone. The stone itself pulsed one final, intense beat, and then the glowing patterns on the walls flared blindingly bright. And Kalen, standing before the pedestal, unleashed the power he had gathered. It burst from him not as light, but as a wave of pure, vibrant energy, the antithesis of the shadow. It felt like life, like growth, like the dawn breaking over the darkest night. The energy struck the monstrous aberration like a physical force. The creature roared, a sound of agony and dissolution. Its twisted form began to unravel, not into smoke like the smaller ones, but into a chaotic storm of dark energy and shrieking void. The very air around it seemed to crackle and split. The storm of dissolution consumed the creature entirely, leaving behind only a lingering, bitter scent and a silence that was absolute, broken only by the echoes of its final scream. The dark vortex near the passage entrance, from which it had emerged, snapped shut, vanishing as if it had never been. The glowing patterns on the walls dimmed, returning to their faint, ethereal pulse. The ground stopped trembling. The chamber was quiet once more. Kalen stood panting before the pedestal, his legs weak, his entire body aching. The intense energy had subsided, leaving him feeling hollowed out, but the radiant presence remained in his chest, a warm ember in the aftermath of the storm. He looked down at the heartstone. It no longer pulsed, but its surface seemed less dull now, catching the faint wall light with a subtle inner glow. He turned, stumbling slightly, towards Lissa and Bram. Lissa was kneeling, clutching her side, but her eyes were wide with amazement and relief. Bram was leaning against the wall, his breathing ragged, but he managed a weak nod of acknowledgement. Elara, still trembling, was staring at the spot where the monster had dissolved, her eyes wide with wonder. Kalen, Lissa breathed, her voice hoarse. What ... What was that? Kalen shook his head, trying to find the words. I don't know ... exactly. The stone, it showed me things, power, the shadow, and ... something in me. He placed a hand over his chest, feeling the warm ember within. It felt like fighting the gloom with everything I am. Elara slowly approached, looking at the heartstone, then at Kalen. They speak of the heartstone not just as a seal, but as a focal point for Ardoria's lifeblood. It resonates with those who carry the spark of the first stone, those resistant to Salak's touch. She looked at Kalen with a new intensity. Kelen ... You might be one of them. Kalen felt a chill despite the warmth in his chest. A spark of the first dawn? Resistant to the shadow? His own past was a mystery, an orphan raised in a quiet village. He had never felt special, only ordinary. But what he had just done, that was anything but ordinary. We need to keep moving, Bram said, pushing himself off the wall, his arms still useless, but his determination clear. That thing might be gone, but this place ... it's active now. And whatever that stone did ... the shadow felt it. It knows you're here now, Kalen. Lissa nodded, wincing as she stood up. He's right. We drew its attention. We need to find the orb, and quickly, before it brings the true weight of its power down on us. She looked towards the back of the chamber. Is there another way out? Elara, her scholarly focus returning, moved towards the wall opposite the shattered passage entrance. The glowing patterns there were different, denser. Yes, she said, running her hand over the symbols. This way, the runes indicate a path that leads ... deeper still, towards the wellspring of Ercys. The legends say the orb rests at the wellspring. Deeper, of course. The Orb of Ercys, the object of hope, lay at the heart of this corrupted darkness. Kalen looked at the passage Elara indicated. It was just a section of the wall, currently solid, but he could feel the faint pull from it, a resonance with the power now within him. He looked at his companions. Lissa, injured but resolute. Bram, wounded but unbreakable. Elara, fearful but brave, armed with knowledge. And himself, changed by the heartstone, carrying a power he didn't understand, marked now by the shadow's attention. They had faced a monster born of the gloom and emerged victorious, but at a cost. They were injured tired and had revealed themselves to an ancient evil. But they also had a new understanding, a new power, and a clearer path forward, albeit one that led into the deepest, most dangerous parts of the murk of Zyre. The silence in the chamber was heavy, filled with a lingering presence of the shadow and the faint hum of the ancient patterns. Kalen felt the weight of their quest pressing down on him, heavier than ever before. The orb was close, perhaps, but the path to it was fraught with unimaginable peril, and the shadow was watching, always watching. He took a steadying breath, pushing away the fatigue and the fear. He looked at Lisa, Bram, and Elara, a fierce wave of protectiveness washing over him. They had followed him into this nightmare. He wouldn't let them down. "All right," Kalen said, his voice stronger now, resonant with the power that lay dormant within him. "Let's go." To the wellspring. Elara nodded, placing her hand on the section of the wall she had indicated. Kalen, understanding the connection, walked over and placed his hand beside hers, focusing the ember of power in his chest. With a low grinding sound identical to the first hidden passage, the wall slid inward, revealing a new darkness beyond. The air from this passage was colder still, carrying the scent of ozone and something strangely pure. Cutting through the foulness of the murk, it felt like stepping from one nightmare into a deeper, older one, but with a flicker of ancient hope guiding the way. They stepped through, leaving the chamber and the watchful Heartstone behind, venturing into the unknown depths that lay between them and the legendary Orb of Ercys. The path ahead was uncertain, the dangers immense, but they pressed on, the fate of Ardoria resting on their weary shoulders. The hum of the ancient patterns faded behind them as they descended into the final hidden layer of Vixia's forgotten core. The air in the newly opened passage was colder than the murk outside, sharp and clean compared to the pervasive stench of decay and toxicity, yet carrying a faint metallic tang and something else, something subtly pure, like the distant scent of rain on ancient stone. It was a stark contrast to the foulness they had just escaped, but no less unnerving. The passage itself was unlike the rough-hewn cellar they had first entered or the natural cavern with the blood lake. This felt deliberate, carved with incredible precision. The walls, ceiling, and floor were lined with the same complex, geometric patterns that had pulsed faintly in the chamber, but here they glowed with a stronger, steady luminescence, casting an ethereal light that pushed back the absolute darkness, but also felt strangely sterile. Lissa moved first, holding her lamp high, though its weak flame seemed almost redundant against the light of the patterns. She favored her side, her movements a little stiff, but her focus was unwavering. Bram followed, his breathing heavy, one arm wrapped tightly, and a strip of cloth torn from his cloak cradled against his chest. He walked with a slow, careful tread, his eyes scanning the unnatural perfection of the passage walls as if expecting them to shift or collapse. Alara came next, her initial terror replaced by a wide-eyed fascination with the glowing symbols, her hand occasionally reaching out to trace their lines, a silent awe on her face. Kalen took the rear, his gaze lingering for a moment on the dark, silent chamber they were leaving behind, the empty pedestal of the Heartstone, a somber sentinel in the dimming light. He felt the lingering echo of the power that had surged through him, a warm, low hum in his chest that was a counterpoint to the chill of the passage air. Stepping into the passage, the transition was immediate and disorienting. The stone was smooth beneath their feet, almost unnaturally so, and the geometric patterns seemed to writhe just at the edge of his vision, creating a strange sense of movement even when they stood still. The air was thin but breathable, lacking the oppressive weight of the murk above, yet the cold seeped into their bones, a dry, deep cold that felt older than ice. The faint metallic scent intensified, mingling with the strange purity, creating an unsettling dichotomy. This feels wrong, Bram muttered, his voice tight with unease. Not like the tunnels above, too clean, too quiet. Alara, however, seemed almost exhilarated. The ancient builders, the architects of the First Age, these are their workings, untouched by time or the shadow's influence. She paused, running her hand over a particularly intricate pattern. No, not untouched. See? She pointed to a place where the glowing lines seemed faded, almost broken, and a faint, dark stain marred the otherwise perfect surface. The shadow reaches even here, but the warding, it holds. Kalen felt it too, the pervasive pressure of the shadow, but here it was different. It wasn't the suffocating, despair-inducing gloom of the upper murk. It felt more like a vast, cold intelligence watching them, assessing the new presence within Kalen. The warm ember in his chest, the residual power from the Heartstone, seemed to pulse in response, a silent challenge. The passage began to descend, the slope gradual at first, then becoming steeper. There were no stairs, just the smooth, angled surface, requiring careful footing. Lissa led the way, her injured side clearly bothering her, but she moved with a grim determination, her focus solely on the path ahead. Bram followed slowly, his grunts of pain barely audible. "How was your side, Lissa?" Caitlin asked, keeping close behind Alara. She didn't look back. "It's a deep cut. Hurts like hell when I move, but I can keep going." Her voice was clipped, pragmatic. She wouldn't admit weakness, not here. "And your arm, Bram?" "Broken, most likely," Bram grunted, "or close to it. Useless for fighting, mostly, but I can still walk." His voice was rough, but there was an underlying thread of resilience Kalen admired. Bram had seen too much, endured too much, to be easily broken. Kalen felt a pang of guilt. They were injured because he had drawn the monster's attention, because he had been caught off guard by the Heartstone's power. He hadn't asked them to follow him into this, but they had, without hesitation. He owed them. "We'll stop and bind it better when we can," Kalen said, though he knew stopping in this unknown depth felt inherently dangerous. Keep moving, Lissa said, her voice firm. Safety is ahead, not behind us. The descent continued, the passage winding deeper and deeper. The glowing patterns remained constant, providing enough light to see by, but also creating a sense of being perpetually enclosed. The metallic, pure scent grew stronger, sharp, and almost ozone-like. Elara continued to study the walls as they passed, occasionally stopping to point out a particularly significant cluster of runes. These speak of the weavers, she murmured, her voice hushed. The ancient Vexians who built these deep places. They sought to understand the heart of the world, to tap into its power. They believed Ardoria was alive, its lifeblood flowing through places like the wellspring. And they built wards to protect it? Kaelin asked, looking at the glowing patterns. And to contain it, Elara added, her gaze troubled. Power of this magnitude, it is not easily controlled. The texts hint at ... consequences for tampering with the world's heart. Kaelin felt the ember in his chest pulse again, a subtle echo of the energy Elara described. He was connected to that power now, whether he understood it or not. What consequences might there be for him? After what felt like hours, the passage widened slightly, and the angle of descent lessened. They were deep underground now, a chilling thought in a place saturated with the shadow's influence. The air here was different again, heavier, carrying the faint scent of moisture and something else, something sweet and cloying that made the hairs on Kellen's arms stand up. They emerged into a vast natural cavern, far larger than the one with the blood lake. The ceiling was lost in the darkness high above, and the chamber stretched out before them, a landscape of jagged rocks and strange, organic-looking formations that pulsed with a faint, sickeningly green light. The glowing geometric patterns of the passage ended abruptly at the cavern entrance, as if the ancient builders had chosen not to venture further into this natural space. In the center of the cavern, partially obscured by the rock formations and the green glow, was a large open space. The sweet, cloying scent was strongest from that direction, accompanied by a low, rhythmic thrumming sound that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. The wellspring? Kaelin whispered, the name from Elara's texts echoing in his mind. Elara nodded, her face pale in the green light. It must be the wellspring of Ercys, but the legends describe it as a place of pure light and healing. She gestured around the cavern, at the sickly green glow and the unnerving formations. This is corrupted. Nothing down here is untouched by the shadow, Ram said grimly, his eyes scanning the cavern floor. Careful where you step. Those green things ... they look alive. As he spoke, one of the green formations near them shifted, its pulsing light intensifying. A tendril, thick and rope-like, snaked out from its base, dragging itself slowly across the ground towards them. Move, Lissa snapped, drawing her sword, despite her injury. She slashed at the tendril, but the steel seemed to slide off its surface, leaving only a shallow, quickly healing cut. Not a physical attack, Elara cried. They draw energy. They feed on life. Kaelin felt a sudden, draining sensation, a coldness spreading from his feet upwards. The tendril was connected to the pulsing formation, and it was leaching the warmth, the life force from the air around it and from them. He instinctively focused the ember in his chest, pushing the radiant energy outwards. As the pale internal light spread from him, touching the tendril, the rope-like growth recoiled with a silent, violent spasm. The sickly green light of the formation dimmed momentarily. It's the same energy, Kalen realized aloud. It repels the shadow's corruption. Then keep it up, Lyssa said, backing away from the tendril. We need to cross this cavern. The cavern floor was a maze of these pulsing green formations and jagged rock. Navigating it was slow and perilous. The air was thick with the sweet, cloying scent, and the rhythmic thrumming from the center grew louder, a deep, resonant beat that felt almost like a giant heart. As they moved deeper into the cavern, more of the green formations reacted, sending out tendrils or releasing clouds of fine green spores that irritated their lungs and made their skin crawl. Kalen maintained the outward flow of his newfound energy, creating a bubble of pale light around the group. It wasn't a bright light, but it was effective, causing the tendrils to shrink back and the spores to dissipate before they reached them. But maintaining the energy was draining. He felt the ache in his muscles return, the fatigue pressing down. The ember in his chest, while potent, felt finite, like a well that could be drawn upon, but not infinitely. How much further? Bram asked, his voice strained. His arm hung heavily, and he stumbled occasionally. Towards the sound, Lyssa directed, pointing towards the center of the cavern with her sword. That's where the wellspring must be. The thrumming grew louder, a powerful bass rhythm that resonated in their bones. It was both compelling and deeply unsettling. The sweet, cloying scent intensified, almost sickeningly sweet now, with an undercurrent of something metallic, like the blood lake. They reached the edge of the central area, a wide depression in the cavern floor. Here, the rock formations were less frequent, giving way to a smooth, polished stone surface that seemed to absorb the light, making the center unervingly dark despite the pervasive green glow from the periphery. And in the very center of this dark space, the source of the thrumming was the wellspring. It wasn't a pool of water or a geyser of light as Kalen might have imagined from the legends. It was a pulsing mass of pure, concentrated darkness. It swirled and shifted, not like smoke, but like a liquid void, absorbing all light that touched it. The thrumming emanated from this mass, a deep, resonant pulse that felt like the heartbeat of the shadow itself. And floating just above the surface of this swirling darkness, held aloft by some unseen force, was the Orb of Ercys. It was not what Kalen had expected. The legend spoke of a glowing sphere of pure light. This orb was large, perhaps the size of a man's head, but it was dull and dark, like polished obsidian, reflecting none of the ambient green light, yet somehow distinct from the absolute blackness of the swirling void beneath it. It looked like the Heartstone, but on a massive scale. That's the orb? Kalen breathed, a wave of disappointment and confusion washing over him. It looked inert, dead. How could that repel the shadow? Elara stumbled forward, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Its single quotes, S. changed. The texts. They said the orb held the light of the first dawn. It was the counterpoint to Salak's void. She looked at the dark orb, then at the swirling darkness beneath it. The wellspring ... It's corrupted, and it's draining the orb, consuming its light. The sweet, cloying scent was overpowering here, thick with the metallic tang. It wasn't just a smell. It felt like it was trying to seep into their minds, whispering temptations, fears, and despair. Kaelin felt the familiar pressure of the shadow, but here it was immense, a physical weight pressing down, threatening to crush them. The thrumming intensified, a maddening beat that resonated with the darkness of the wellspring. Lissa gripped her sword hilt, her knuckles white. Bram leaned heavily against a rock formation near the edge of the depression, his good arm drawn, his face pale and sweaty. Alara stood frozen, staring at the corrupted wellspring and the dark orb, and Kaelin felt the ember in his chest flare in response to the overwhelming presence of the shadow. The power from the Heartstone, the spark of the first dawn Alara had spoken of, felt like a tiny candle flame against the vast, hungry void before him. "We have to get it," Kaelin said, his voice tight. "The orb. If it's being drained, we have to stop it." "How?" Lissa asked, her gaze flicking from the orb to the pulsing darkness of the wellspring. "We can't just ... walk into that." As if in answer, the swirling darkness of the wellspring shifted, coalescing slightly. From its depths, shapes began to form, not solid creatures like the aberration from the lake, but shifting, amorphous masses of shadow and malice. They writhed and stretched, tendrils of void reaching towards the orb. "Guardians," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. "Born of the corrupted wellspring, they protect the process, the draining." The shadow guardians flowed outwards from the wellspring, silent and swift, gliding over the polished stone towards them. They were not physical in the conventional sense, more like animated sections of the deepest night, yet they radiated a palpable coldness and malevolence. "They're not like the others," Bram warned, his voice hoarse. "Don't think steel will stop them." Kaelin felt the intense focus of the shadow's intelligence in these creatures. They were not mindless beasts. They were extensions of Salak's will, designed to defend this corrupted heart. He raised his hands, focusing the power in his chest, preparing to unleash the radiant energy that had defeated the aberration. The pale light emanated from him, a beacon against the gloom. As the light touched the nearest shadow guardian, the creature didn't recoil or dissolve. Instead, the light seemed to be absorbed by the darkness, drawn into its form, making it denser, stronger. The guardian pulsed with a deeper blackness, and its movement accelerated. "It's feeding on it," Alara cried, horrified. "Your power ... they spark. It's the opposite of the shadow, but here, in the wellspring, the corruption reverses it. It feeds the void." A cold dread seized Kaelin. His power, the very thing that had protected them and brought them this far, was useless here. Worse, it was a weapon for the shadow. The shadow guardians were upon them, flowing around the edges of Kaelin's rapidly fading light bubble. Lissa slashed at one, her sword passing through it as if it were mist, leaving only a wave of chilling cold that made her gasp. Bram tried to throw a rock, but it simply vanished as it entered the creature's form. They were defenseless against these things. One of the guardians flowed towards Ilara, its darkness reaching out like grasping claws. Kalen lunged forward, shoving Ilara behind him, abandoning the useless light. He drew his sword, a futile gesture against the non-physical threat. Just as the shadow guardian flowed over him, Kalen felt the ember in his chest recoil, instinctively withdrawing the energy that had just proven fatal. He felt a crushing cold, a sense of utter despair and emptiness washing over him, the true nature of the shadow touching him directly. He choked, his vision blurring, but then a different sensation. As the shadow guardian flowed through him, seeking to consume the spark within him, Kalen felt the ember react in a new way. It didn't push back, it shifted. It didn't try to expel the shadow, it seemed to twist its path, redirect it. The shadow guardian recoiled from Kalen, not because of light or force, but as if hitting an invisible, repellent barrier within him. It shrieked, a silent, tearing sound, and reformed slightly, its amorphous shape momentarily disrupted. Kalen gasped, staggering back. The cold was still there, the despair lingering, but the immediate threat had passed through him without consuming him. What happened? Lissa asked, her voice tight. Kalen looked at the retreating guardian, then at his hands, then back at the pulsing darkness of the wellspring. He felt the ember in his chest humming, not with outward power, but with a coiled internal tension. It went through me, he said, the words difficult to form. But it didn't. It didn't take anything. The power ... It redirected it. Ilara, recovering from her fright, stared at him, then at the wellspring. The spark of the first dawn, she whispered, her eyes wide. It's not just light ... That's resistance, an inherent immunity to the shadow's touch. The other guardians, seeing the first one repelled, hesitated for a moment, their formless shapes swirling near the edge of the polished stone. The main body of the wellspring pulsed faster, the thrumming growing more urgent, more demanding. It wants the spark, Bram realized, his voice grim. Selok felt it. It's a threat to the draining. It wants to consume you, Kalen. Kalen felt the truth of that statement deep in his bones. The crushing presence of the shadow was focused entirely on him now, a vast ancient hunger directed at the small, burning ember within his chest. He was the key, not just to using the orb, but to accessing it, to disrupting the draining process. He was the only one who could get close to the wellspring, the only one who could withstand the touch of its guardians. But he couldn't fight them. He could only endure their touch, and they were relentless. There were too many, and they would eventually overwhelm him, wear down whatever protective quality the ember possessed. He looked at Lissa, at Bram, at Ilara. They were injured, defenseless against these new creatures. He couldn't ask them to fight this. He had to go alone. I have to go to the orb, Kalen said, his voice firm, masking the fear that churned in his gut. I'm the only one who can get through them. Kalen, no. Lissa protested immediately, pushing herself off the wall. It's too dangerous. We don't know what will happen when you touch the orb. We don't know what will happen if I don't, Kalen countered. looking at the dark, dull sphere floating above the swirling void. It was fading, its light being consumed. Hope was literally being drained away before their eyes. Elara, you said the orb was a counterpoint to Selak's void. Maybe touching it with the ember in me. Maybe it can reverse the draining, reignite its light, or it could consume you entirely, Bram warned, his eyes fixed on the swirling wellspring. That thing is pure corruption. We don't have a choice, Kaelin said, looking back at them. His friends who had followed him into this hill. He had to try, stay back, stay out of the wellspring area. The Guardian seemed tied to it. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He focused on the ember in his chest, not asking it for power, but for resilience, for protection. He felt it settle, a quiet strength. He started walking towards the center of the cavern, towards the dark wellspring and the dull orb. The polished stone beneath his feet was cold. The thrumming intensified with every step, vibrating through his body, a resonant frequency that felt like it was trying to shake his very soul apart. The sweet, cloying scent was nauseating. The Shadow Guardians flowed towards him, silent waves of darkness. He didn't try to avoid them. He steeled himself and let the first one flow over him. The cold was absolute, a piercing chill that felt like being plunged into the void itself. The despair was a physical weight, a crushing certainty that everything was hopeless, that resistance was futile, that surrender was the only escape. He felt the Guardian probing, searching for the ember within him, trying to latch onto it, to pull it out, to extinguish it. But the ember held firm. It didn't fight back with force, but with a passive, unyielding presence. It twisted the Guardian's touch, redirecting its malevolent energy, letting it pass through without gaining purchase. The Guardian recoiled, a silent, tearing sound echoing in Kellen's mind, not his ears. It reformed and flowed back towards the wellspring, seemingly frustrated. Kalen kept walking, breathing heavily, the lingering cold and despair clinging to him like a shroud. Another Guardian flowed towards him, then 2 more. He let them pass through him, one after another, each touch a fresh wave of agonizing cold and soul-crushing despair. His legs felt weak. His head swam. It took every ounce of his will not to collapse, not to surrender to the overwhelming emptiness. He could hear Lissa calling his name, Elara whispering ancient words, Bram grunting in pain and frustration. They were watching, helpless. He reached the edge of the swirling wellspring of darkness. The thrumming was deafening here, a physical force that made his teeth rattle. The void swirled beneath the orb, hungry and vast. He could feel its pull, not just on the orb, but on the ember within him, a desire to consume the last vestiges of light in this place. The orb floated just a few feet away, dark and inert. It felt strangely distant, disconnected, yet undeniably the object of their quest. Kalen hesitated. Could he reach it? Could he touch it? What would happen if he did? Would the ember be enough to rekindle its light? Or would the corrupted wellspring simply consume them both? He felt the shadow's gaze on him, vast and ancient, watching his every move. This was its heart, its corrupted sanctuary. He was a trespasser, a tiny spark of defiance in its absolute dominion. He pushed the doubt away. He had come this far. Lissa, Bram, and Elara had risked everything for this. The people of Ardoria were suffering, losing hope under the encroaching night. He took another step onto the polished stone within the depression, closer to the wellspring. The thrumming intensified, pounding in his skull. The swirling darkness seemed to pulse in rhythm with the sound, reaching faint, wispy tendrils towards him. He reached out a trembling hand towards the dark orb. It was within his grasp. Just a few more steps. He felt another guardian flow through him, colder, more probing than the last. It lingered for a moment, trying to find a weakness, an opening, but the ember held. He stumbled, gasping, the effort of resisting the despair almost too much. He was just an arm's length away from the orb. The air around it felt strangely still, a pocket of unnerving calm amidst the chaotic energy of the wellspring. He stretched out his hand, his fingers trembling. The dark surface of the orb seemed to pull at him, not with light, but with a strange, resonant silence, a quiet hum beneath the overwhelming thrumming of the wellspring. He touched the orb. The moment his fingers made contact with the smooth, dark surface, everything changed. The thrumming of the wellspring ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnerving, absolute silence. The swirling darkness of the void beneath the orb froze, becoming a solid, impenetrable blackness. The sickly green glow from the surrounding formations flickered and died, plunging the cavern into near-total darkness, broken only by the faint, internal glow of Kellen's ember. And the orb itself, it began to hum. Not the deep, resonant thrumming of the wellspring, but a high, pure tone that resonated in the air, a sound of immense power contained. The dark surface of the orb began to crackle, not with energy, but with what looked like lines of pure white light spreading across its surface, like a shattered mirror reflecting the dawn. Kellen felt the ember in his chest surge, responding to the orb's hum. It wasn't drawing power from him. It felt like they were recognizing each other, two parts of a whole, resonating with a shared ancient frequency. The power of the spark within him wasn't just a resistance to the shadow. It was a key to the orb itself, but the silence was short-lived. The frozen darkness of the wellspring began to stir again, not swirling, but rippling with a silent, violent intensity. The air grew heavy, thick with an unimaginable malevolence. And from the depths of the corrupted wellspring, a new sound emerged. A low, grinding groan that felt like the world tearing itself apart. Elara cried out. Lissa and Bram scrambled back towards the passage entrance, their faces etched with fear. The orb in Kellen's hands, now crisscrossed with lines of pure light, began to vibrate violently. The ground beneath them trembled, the very stone groaning under an unseen pressure. The vast, ancient intelligence Kellen had felt watching them earlier was now fully focused, fully present. The shadow of Salak was stirring not just in the land above, but here at its corrupted heart, awakened by the touch of the spark on the orb. From the frozen darkness of the wellspring, a shape began to rise. Not an aberration, not a guardian, but something immense, something that felt like the manifestation of the void itself. It was vast, formless, and utterly terrifying, a mass of conscious, malevolent darkness. The thrumming void, the deepest corruption of the wellspring, animated by Selach's direct influence. Kalen stood before it, the orb vibrating in his hands, the lines of light spreading rapidly across its surface. He felt the power of the ember within him, resonating with the orb, but the scale of the darkness rising before him was beyond anything he could have imagined. The thrumming void had no features, no limbs, just a palpable presence of absolute negation, of endless hunger. It loomed over him, absorbing the faint light from the orb's cracking surface, seeming to grow larger, denser. This wasn't just a monster to be fought. This was the shadow's power, concentrated and unleashed. Kalen gripped the orb, its vibrating energy coursing through him, mingling with the ember. He looked at the terrifying shape rising from the wellspring, at the silent, watchful darkness of Selach behind it. He had found the orb, but finding it hadn't brought light. It had awakened something far more terrible, something that now stood between him and any hope of escape, any hope of repelling the encroaching gloom. The final confrontation wasn't waiting for them at the end of their journey. It was here now in the corrupted heart of the murk of Zyre. The fate of Ardoria rested not just on retrieving the orb, but on whether a single spark of ancient light could stand against the thrumming void, against the shadow itself in the deepest, darkest place in Ardoria. He held the orb, its surface now almost entirely covered in the network of brilliant white light, a shattered star in his hands, and braced himself for the inevitable clash. The wellspring of Ercys, the heart of the world, had revealed its deepest secret, and it was a nightmare given form. The thrumming void pulsed, silent but for the deafening roar in Kellen's mind, and the battle for Ardoria's soul was about to begin, not with a clash of armies, but with a single, desperate stand against the ultimate darkness. The air was thick with a sweet, cloying scent, and the rhythmic thrumming from the center grew louder, a deep bass rhythm that felt almost like a giant heart. Just as the shadow guardian flowed over him, Kalen felt the ember in his chest recoil, instinctively withdrawing the energy that had just proven fatal. The silence that followed Kellen's touch was profound, a physical weight pressing down on the air, replacing the deafening thrumming. It was the silence of a stopped heart, vast and absolute. The swirling darkness of the wellspring had indeed frozen, solidifying into an immense, featureless obsidian mass that reflected nothing, absorbing all ambient light. The sickly green glow from the strange formations around the cavern's periphery flickered, wavered, and then died, plunging the chamber into a suffocating blackness. Only the faint, pale internal glow of Kellen's ember, now visible pressing against the fabric of his tunic, and the nascent, brilliant white lines spreading across the surface of the orb in his hands provided any illumination. The orb itself hummed, a high, pure tone that resonated not just in the air, but in Kalen's very bones. It was a sound of immense power, tightly coiled, utterly unlike the corrupted thrumming it had replaced. The dark, dull surface he had first touched was rapidly becoming a network of brilliant, glowing fissures, like a shattered mirror reflecting a sun yet to rise. Each line pulsed with an intense, clean white light that seemed to push back the suffocating darkness in a small radius around him. He felt the ember in his chest surge, a feeling of intense recognition, a merging of frequencies. It wasn't draining him. It was amplifying, resonating with the orb. The spark of the first dawn, Elara's words echoed in his mind, wasn't just a piece of power. It was a key. A key to this, the legendary Orb of Ercys. He understood, deep in his soul, that the ember and the orb were intrinsically linked, two fragments of the same primordial light, separated long ago. But the silence was a prelude, not an end. The frozen darkness of the wellspring rippled, not swirling as before, but convulsing with a silent, violent intensity. The air grew heavy, thick with a malevolence so profound it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just the pressure of the shadow he had felt in the murk, or even the focused hunger of the guardians. This was different. This was the source. A new sound emerged from the depths of the corrupted wellspring, a low, grinding groan, like colossal stones being crushed, like the very foundations of the world screaming in agony. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and burrowed directly into the mind, filling Kalen with a primal terror. Elara cried out, a sharp, fearful sound swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive air. Lissa and Bram stumbled back towards the passage entrance, seeking refuge against the raw, unleashed power that now filled the cavern. Their faces, illuminated faintly by Kellen's internal glow, were etched with stark fear. The orb in Kellen's hands, now almost entirely covered in the lattice of pure white light, vibrated violently. The ground beneath them trembled, the polished stone of the wellspring depression cracking audibly under an unseen, immense pressure. Dust rained down from the unseen ceiling far above. The vast, ancient intelligence of the shadow Selok was no longer merely watching. It was here. Its influence, its power was fully focused, fully present in this place, at its corrupted heart. Kellen's act of touching the orb, of reuniting the spark with the artifact of the first dawn, had not just stopped the draining. It had enraged and awakened the entity at the core of the darkness. From the rippling, frozen darkness of the wellspring, a shape began to rise. It was not defined, not solid in any way Kalen could comprehend. It was simply more darkness, darker than the surrounding gloom, a mass of conscious, malevolent void. It had no features, no limbs, no discernible form, yet it loomed. It expanded upwards, sideways, filling the space before him, radiating a palpable presence of absolute negation, of endless hunger, of a cosmic coldness that froze the soul. The thrumming void, the deepest corruption of the wellspring, animated by Salak's direct will, a nightmare given form, stood before him. Kalen stood his ground, gripping the orb. Its vibrating energy coursed through him, mingling with the ember, a powerful counterpoint to the terrifying presence rising before him. He felt the orb's light trying to push back the void, but the scale was overwhelming. It was a single star attempting to illuminate the infinite abyss. The thrumming void had no eyes, but Kalen felt its gaze, a focus so intense it felt like being dissected. It was not a monster to be fought with steel or spell. It was the shadow's power, concentrated and unleashed, raw and absolute. It pulsed, a silent internal beat that echoed the vanished thrumming, a rhythm of pure malevolence. It began to flow outwards, not rushing, but expanding with an inexorable, terrifying slowness, like a tide of cosmic dread washing over the polished stone. Kalen braced himself. He had found the orb. He had activated it. But he hadn't brought salvation. He had brought the final confrontation crashing down upon them, here now in the corrupted heart of the murk of Zyre. The fate of Ardoria rested not just on retrieving the orb, but on whether a single spark of ancient light, amplified by a reawakened artifact, could stand against the thrumming void, against the shadow itself, in the deepest, darkest place in Ardoria. He held the orb, its surface now almost entirely covered in the network of brilliant, white light, a shattered star in his hands, and waited. The wellspring of Ercys, the heart of the world, had revealed its deepest secret, and it was a nightmare given form. The thrumming void pulsed, silent but for the deafening roar in Kellen's mind, and the battle for Ardoria's soul was about to begin, not with a clash of armies, but with a single, desperate stand against the ultimate darkness. The first wave of the void reached him. It wasn't a physical impact. It was an invasion. A crushing weight of despair descended, heavier than any stone. It spoke in his mind, not with words, but with feelings. Hopelessness, futility, surrender. There is only night. There was always only night. Your light is a lie. Your hope is a lie. Resistance is pain. Cease. Become one with the peace of oblivion. Simultaneously, an unimaginable cold wrapped around him, a chill that went deeper than skin and bone, seeking to extinguish the very spark of life and warmth within him. It was the cold of absolute emptiness, the absence of everything. Kalen gasped, his body convulsing involuntarily. His knees threatened to buckle. The orb in his hands vibrated even more fiercely, its light flaring in response. But the despair was immense, drowning everything. He felt the ember in his chest fighting, not by pushing back the void, but by reaffirming its own existence, its own truth against the shadow's lies. It was an act of pure defiance, an internal assertion of light against the encroaching dark. Lys's voice cut through the mental assault, strained but clear. Kalen, hold on. Ram grunted from somewhere behind her. Blast it, Kalen, don't give it anything. Elara was chanting, her voice low and urgent, reciting ancient words Kalen couldn't understand. He focused on their voices, anchors in the swirling mental chaos. They were here. They were counting on him. He couldn't surrender. He clung to the orb, its light now intensely bright, the pure white patterns pulsating in time with the frantic beat of his own heart. He focused on the ember not as a source of power to fight, but as his core identity, the part of him that refused to be extinguished. He felt the void probing, searching for a weakness, a crack in his resolve, a place where the ember's light faltered. The despair intensified, twisting his memories, his hopes, showing him visions of Ardoria consumed, his friends dead, his quest a failure. See? The silent voice of the void whispered, inevitability. Why struggle? It changes nothing. He grit his teeth, forcing the visions away. It changes everything. He thought back, directing the thought, not with words, but with the raw energy of his will, amplified by the ember and the orb. As long as I draw breath, as long as this light endures, it changes everything. The thrumming void recoiled slightly, the crushing pressure easing for a moment. Not defeat, but surprise. His refusal to yield, his internal defiance, was unexpected. The orb in his hands flared again, a burst of pure light emanating from the network of fissures. The light wasn't just pushing back the darkness. It seemed to be sanctifying the space around him, creating a small pocket of resistance against the void's pervasive influence. Elara's chanting grew louder, more confident. The orb resonates. It is the counter-frequency. It needs to be anchored. It needs a conduit. A conduit. He was the conduit. The ember within him, the spark, was the connection between him and the orb, and now between the orb and the corrupted wellspring. The thrumming void flowed forward again, faster this time, a silent wave of concentrated malice. It seemed to recognize the threat Kalen and the activated orb represented to its existence, to the draining process. It wasn't just trying to consume him. It was trying to sever the connection, to reclaim the orb and plunge it back into its silent, draining embrace. More shadow guardians coalesced from the edges of the wellspring depression, their forms shifting and writhing. They flowed towards Kalen, not directly entering the space illuminated by the orb's light, but circling, waiting for the void to weaken him. Lissa moved, despite her injured side. She couldn't fight the guardians, but she could defend the others. Elara, stay focused. Bram, can you move at all? Get ready to run. My arm's busted, not my legs, Bram replied, though his voice was still strained. He was scanning the cavern, looking for exits, for opportunities. The thrumming void hit Kalen again, this time focusing its attack on his mind, a barrage of fear, doubt, and sensory overload. The cold was sharper, the despair deeper. He felt his connection to the ember strain, like a thin wire stretched to breaking point. He could feel the void trying to worm its way past the ember's passive resistance, to touch the vulnerable core of his being. You are weak, you are nothing. Your power is borrowed. Your courage is borrowed. You failed your family. You will fail these friends. Let go. He stumbled back a step, the orb still gripped tight. The lines of light on its surface flickered momentarily. He could feel the void's influence trying to seep into the orb itself, to dim its reawakened light. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. The ember was a warm, persistent point of light in the crushing darkness of his mind. It wasn't just power. It was a feeling of belonging, of purpose, of a truth that transcended the shadow's lies. It felt like home. It felt like Ardoria before the blight. He focused on that feeling, on the unwavering light of the ember. He pushed back against the despair, not with force, but with affirmation. I am Kalen Vance. I am not weak. This power is part of me. These friends are my strength. I will not fail. The orb in his hands flared brighter than before, casting an intense white light that momentarily illuminated the entire depression, pushing the thrumming void back with visible force. The silent pulsing of the void faltered, its formless shape rippling violently as if in pain. Alara gasped. The orb is anchored. Kellen's will. He is the anchor. Lyssa yelled. An anchor doesn't mean it's defeated. Kalen, what do we do? Kalen opened his eyes, the light of the orb reflecting in them. He looked at the retreating mass of the thrumming void, at the circling shadow guardians. He felt the connection to the orb, the resonant hum deep within him. The orb wasn't just resisting the void, it was interacting with it. It was a counter-frequency, as Alara had said, creating dissonance in the shadow's harmony of corruption. But it wasn't enough to destroy it. Not here, at its source. He felt the orb guiding him, or perhaps the ember within him, interpreting the orb's purpose. The orb was a key, yes, and an anchor, but it was also a lens. It could focus the primordial light, not just to resist, but to act. He raised the orb higher, channeling his will, his defiance, his hope for Ardoria through the ember and into the artifact. The white light intensified, becoming almost blinding. The lattice of light on the orb's surface began to spin, creating a vortex of pure, radiant energy. The thrumming void shrieked, a silent, tearing sound that was pure agony. It recoiled further, shrinking back into the central wellspring depression. The shadow guardians scattered, dissolving back into the ambient gloom. But the void wasn't defeated. It was merely recoiling from the focused light. It was still there, immense and malignant, waiting. The light is repelling it, Lyssa shouted, shield-like. But it's not destroying it. It cannot be destroyed here, Alara said, her voice strained. Not in the wellspring. It is too tied to the world's heart. It must be ... contained. Or redirected. Redirected. The word resonated with Kalen. His ember hadn't fought the guardians. It had redirected their touch. Could the orb, through him, redirect the power of the void itself? Or redirect something else? He looked at the orb, spinning with light in his hands. He felt the echoes of Alara's earlier words about the ancient builders, the weavers, and their wards. They built wards to protect it, and to contain it. The glowing geometric patterns of the passage they had entered through had ended abruptly at the cavern entrance. But Kalen felt a faint echo of their energy now, stimulated by the orb's light. The ancient wards. They were still here, surrounding the wellspring, designed to contain the world's heart. Could they contain the corrupted heart as well? He focused the orb's light, turning it slightly towards the cavern entrance, towards where the geometric patterns of the passage began. The light beam struck the bare rock wall at the entrance, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then faint lines of light began to appear on the rock face, mirroring the patterns in the passage, but dormant. The orb's light, channeled through Kalen, was activating them. The wards. Alara gasped, her eyes wide. The containment wards. The orb is the key to them. The thrumming void pulsed with renewed fury, sensing Kellen's intention. It surged forward, a silent wave of darkness aimed directly at him, desperate to stop him from activating the ancient containment system. "They're coming back," Lissa yelled, drawing her sword again, a useless gesture, but a defiant one. "Go back to the passage." Kalen shouted over the silent roar in his mind. "Get ready to seal it." "Seal it?" Ram explained. "With us inside, it's the only way," Alara cried, understanding dawning on her face. "The wards can contain the void, but we have to be on the other side." "No," Lissa shouted. "We're not leaving you. You have to." Kalen yelled back, the strain immense. He could feel the thrumming void closing in, the despair and cold intensifying. The orb's light was holding it at bay, but not for long. The orb needs to activate the wards from the outside. "Get out. I'll follow." He poured all his remaining strength, his will, his connection to the ember and the orb, into the beam of light striking the passage entrance. The dormant patterns on the wall flared into life, glowing with the same pure light as the orb itself. The ground trembled again, the stone groaning, not from pressure this time, but from colossal mechanisms stirring beneath the earth. Lissa hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Her pragmatism, her fierce loyalty, warred within her. But she saw the look on Kellen's face, the absolute necessity in his eyes, and she saw the thrumming void, a terrifying, unstoppable force bearing down on him. She couldn't fight it. Her staying would only mean their collective doom. "Go," she screamed at Bram and Alara, shoving Alara towards the passage entrance. "I'll cover him." She positioned herself between Kalen and the surging void, her sword held high, a purely symbolic defiance against the formless darkness. Bram, despite his injury, didn't argue further. He grabbed Alara, pulling her towards the passage. Alara, her eyes fixed on Kalen, continued chanting, her ancient words now sounding like desperate prayers. Kalen ignored them, pouring all his focus into the orb, into the activation of the wards. The glowing patterns on the wall spread, moving across the rock face, covering the entire entrance to the passage. Massive, unseen stone doors began to grind into place from the sides, carved with the same intricate, glowing runes. The thrumming void reached Lissa. She braced herself, but it flowed around her like water around a stone, not trying to consume her, its focus entirely on Kalen. A sheer cold, the wave of despair that washed over her, still made her gasp, her face contorting in pain. Kalen felt the main force of the void hit him, a devastating blow of existential dread and freezing emptiness. His body screamed in protest. He felt his consciousness waver, his grip on the orb faltering. The orb's light dimmed slightly, struggling against the overwhelming darkness. You are beaten. You are ours. The ember belongs to Salak. The orb belongs to Salak. Ardoria belongs to Salak. The thought was a desperate, raw cry from the deepest part of his soul. He saw Ardoria in his mind, the forests he loved, the people in Ethelberg clinging to hope. Lys's fierce loyalty, Bram's quiet strength, Ilara's quest for knowledge. He saw the sun on a clear day, a memory precious and fragile in the face of this eternal night. He wouldn't let it be extinguished. He roared, a sound ripped from his throat, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated defiance. He shoved the orb forward, directing the last reserves of his strength, his will, the very essence of the ember, into the beam activating the wards. The thrumming void recoiled violently, a silent scream of rage and frustration echoing in Kellen's mind. It couldn't penetrate the activated wards. The ancient containment system, dormant for ages, was now sealing it within the corrupted wellspring. But Kalen was still on the wrong side. He staggered back, the orb still vibrating in his hands, its light now stable and brilliant. The thrumming void, contained but not defeated, pulsed with impotent fury within the sealed depression. The Shadow Guardians, cut off from their source, writhed and dissolved into wisps of smoke. He looked at the massive stone doors, now glowing faintly with the contained light of the wards. They were sealed tight. He was trapped. Behind the doors he could hear muffled shouts. Lysa, Bram, Ilara. They had escaped. They had the orb's key, and they had sealed him in with the heart of the shadow. He felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, now that the immediate, crushing pressure of the void had been lifted. The cold lingered deep in his bones. The despair was still a faint echo, a promise of the darkness that remained. He sank to his knees on the polished stone, the orb held loosely in his hands, its brilliant light casting long, dancing shadows in the dark cavern. The air, though no longer thick with the void's presence, was still heavy, stagnant. The silence was absolute again. Save for his own ragged breathing, he had done it. He had activated the wards, contained the thrumming void, saved his friends, and secured the orb. But he was alone, trapped in the deepest, darkest place in Ardoria, just outside the prison of the Shadow's heart. He looked at the orb. Its light was beautiful, pure, and strong. It felt alive in his hands, a powerful ancient artifact finally reawakened. But what was its purpose now? How could it help Ardoria if he was trapped here? How could he even escape? He pressed his hand against the glowing stone doors. They were solid, unyielding. The wards designed to contain the world's corrupted heart were now containing him. A chilling thought struck him. The ancient texts Ilara had read ... consequences for tampering with the world's heart. Was this the consequence? Being trapped forever as the guardian of Salak's prison? He pushed himself back onto his feet, the orb's light the only thing pushing back the utter blackness of the cavern. He was exhausted, injured, and utterly alone. He had faced the heart of the shadow and survived, but survival had come at a terrible cost. What happened next? The quest wasn't over. The orb was safe, for now, but it needed to be brought back, its power unleashed upon Ardoria. and he was trapped here. He looked around the cavern. The green formations were dead, their sickly glow extinguished. The jagged rocks seemed to press in on him. The air was still, cold, and silent. He felt the ember within him, still warm, still connected to the orb. It wasn't just a key or an anchor. It was a spark of the first dawn. It was hope. Hope, a fragile thing in this place of absolute darkness. But it was all he had. He had to find a way out. He had to get the orb back to Ardoria. He couldn't hear Lissa, Bram, or Ilara anymore. The stone doors were too thick. They were probably trying to figure out what to do, how to open the wards from their side, or perhaps already making the difficult decision to carry on without him, taking the knowledge of the orb back to the surface. He hoped they were safe. He ran his hand over the orb's smooth, cool surface, tracing the lines of pure light. He felt its power, contained and waiting. It was a weapon against the shadow, but a weapon he couldn't currently wield against the encroaching gloom above. Kalen Vance, a young man of 20 years, exhaled shakily, the breath misting in the frigid air. He felt the exhaustion deep in his bones, a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. It was the soul-deep exhaustion of having faced something truly immense, something that had sought to unravel his very being. The chilling echo of the thrumming void's despair still clung to him, a psychic residue that made the air feel heavy with sorrow and futility. He looked at the sealed doors, now a wall of ancient glowing stone. The intricate runes pulsed with a soft, contained light, a visible barrier between him and his friends, between him and the outside world. He could no longer hear Lissa Brennan, the pragmatic warrior of 25, or Bram, or Ilara. The stone was too thick, the containment absolute. They were safe. The thrumming void was contained. The orb was secure. Everything he had set out to do in this place he had achieved, at immense personal cost. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of his composure. He pushed it down. Panic wouldn't open the doors. Panic wouldn't find a way out. He had faced the heart of the shadow. Surely he could face a sealed cavern. He rose slowly, testing his weight on his legs. They ached, his muscles protesting the strain. His ribs were sore from the impact of the void's initial psychic wave, and the despair had left a hollow ache in his chest. But he was alive. He still held the orb, and the ember within him, though quieted after the immense surge of power, still pulsed with a faint, persistent warmth. He held the orb higher, letting its light cut through the oppressive blackness. The cavern was vast, far larger than he had initially perceived from the passage entrance. The wellspring depression, where the thrumming void was now imprisoned behind the glowing doors, was merely the central feature of this immense space. The cavern walls stretched away into the darkness, seemingly without limit, the ceiling lost somewhere high above. The floor was the same polished black stone as the wellspring depression, smooth and cool to the touch. But scattered across it were debris, fallen rocks, shattered remnants of what looked like ancient structures, and strange, inert crystalline formations that resembled the sickly green ones near the wellspring, but were now lifeless and gray. The air was utterly still, devoid of the corrupted thrumming, devoid of the void's malevolent pulse. It was just air, cold, thin, and silent. A profound, unnatural silence that pressed in on his ears. He began to walk, moving away from the sealed doors, his footsteps echoing unervingly in the stillness. The orb's light illuminated his path, revealing more of the cavern's secrets. The walls weren't just bare rock. They were lined with more of the same intricate, glowing runes that adorned the sealed doors and the passage he'd come through. They covered the walls in complex patterns, weaving and interlocking, radiating a faint internal light when the orb's beams swept over them. These were the ancient wards, the containment system built by the weavers, not just around the wellspring, but throughout this entire chamber. This whole cavern was part of the prison. He ran his hand over the glowing runes on the wall. They felt cool and smooth, imbued with an ancient power. They felt responsive, as if the orb's presence was stimulating them, making them hum faintly beneath his touch. Ilara had said the orb was the key to activating the wards. But were they also the key to deactivating them, or finding another way out? He followed the curve of the cavern wall, the orb's light sweeping ahead. The space was irregular, vast alcoves opening up into the darkness, pillars of rock reaching towards the unseen ceiling. He saw more debris, suggesting this chamber had once been more than just a cavern. It felt like the ruins of a monumental structure, perhaps built around the wellspring itself, later collapsed or destroyed. He paused, focusing the orb's light on a particularly large pile of rubble. Among the broken stone and decaying material, he saw something glinting faintly. He approached cautiously, wary of hidden dangers, though the contained void felt strangely distant now, a furious presence behind an impenetrable wall. He knelt and carefully moved aside a piece of broken rock. Beneath it lay a section of intricately carved stone, different from the wall runes. It depicted swirling patterns and geometric shapes, hinting at a forgotten form of art or language. As the orb's light bathed it, the carving pulsed with a faint internal luminescence. A pale blue this time, not the white of the orb or the walls. He touched the carving. It was cool and smooth. There was no immediate effect, no sudden revelation, just a faint glow. Was this just decoration, or was it part of the ancient system? He continued exploring, moving deeper into the cavern. The orb's light was his only guide, a beacon in the absolute darkness. The air grew colder the further he moved from the sealed doors, the silence more profound. He felt utterly isolated, a single point of light and life in a vast, dead space. He thought of Lissa, her fierce loyalty, her willingness to stand against the void with only a sword. He thought of Bram, pragmatic and dependable, injured but still ready to act. He thought of Ilara, her knowledge the key that had brought them this far, her chanting a fragile shield against the darkness. They were outside, worried, likely trying to find a way back to him. But how? The wards were designed to contain the heart of the shadow. They were not meant to be easily bypassed, especially not from the outside. His hope of them opening the doors from their side was slim to none. His escape had to come from within the cavern itself. He scanned the walls, looking for any seam, any crack, any passage that wasn't sealed. The runes covered everything, a seamless web of light and power. It was a perfect prison. He felt a flicker of despair, the familiar cold tendrils seeking purchase in his mind. Trapped. Alone. You succeeded, but at what cost? The orb is safe, but what good is it here? You will die here. And Ardoria will still fall, eventually. He clenched his jaw, tightening his grip on the orb. No. The thought was firm, a quiet assertion of will. I am not alone. The ember is with me. The orb is with me. They are connected. And I will find a way out. He focused on the ember within him. It was a steady warmth, a silent refusal to yield. It felt different from the orb's light, more internal, more personal. It was the core of his resistance, the source of his unexpected connection to the ancient power. He held the orb close to his chest, near where the ember pulsed. The orb's light seemed to draw inward, its pure white intensity focusing, becoming more concentrated. He felt the resonance between the two, the merging of frequencies Alara had spoken of. It wasn't just amplification, it was communication, a silent, intuitive understanding flowing between the ember, the orb, and himself. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feeling, letting the combined energies guide him. He felt a faint pull, not physical, but energetic, drawing him towards a particular direction in the cavern. It was subtle, easily missed, like a whisper in the vast silence. He opened his eyes and turned, letting the pull guide him. It led him away from the sealed doors, deeper into the immense chamber. The path wound through piles of rubble and around massive rock formations. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. After what felt like a long time following the subtle guidance, he reached a section of the cavern wall that looked much like the rest, covered in the same glowing runes. But the pull was stronger here, centered on a specific point on the wall. He approached it cautiously, raising the orb. As the orb's light intensified near this spot, the runes on the wall here flared brighter than elsewhere, their light pulsing rapidly as if in response to a question. He placed his hand on the wall over the area where the pull was strongest. The stone was cold, but the runes beneath his fingers felt alive, vibrating faintly. He focused his will, channeling the energy of the ember and the orb through his touch. He didn't know what he was trying to do, just that this felt important. The runes beneath his hand brightened further, spreading outwards from his touch like ripples on water. The ground beneath his feet trembled, a low, grinding sound beginning deep within the earth. Different from the scream of the contained void, it was a sound of ancient machinery, long dormant, stirring to life. A section of the cavern wall, spanning perhaps 20 feet wide and 30 feet high, began to slide inwards, revealing a dark opening beyond. It wasn't a natural passage, but a perfectly cut archway lined with the same glowing runes. But here they were radiating the pale blue light he had seen on the carved debris earlier. Hope surged through him, a potent counterpoint to the lingering despair, a passage, an exit. He stepped back as the massive stone slab receded fully into the wall, with a final resonant thud. Beyond the archway lay a tunnel, narrow and dark, sloping downwards. The air flowing from it was even colder than the cavern air, carrying a faint, metallic scent. He hesitated for a moment. Where did this passage lead? Deeper into the earth, to another part of the ancient complex, or by some miracle towards the surface? He didn't know, but it was a way out of the sealed cavern, a path forward when there had seemed to be none. He took a deep breath, tightening his grip on the orb. He had faced the void. He wouldn't be stopped by a dark tunnel. He stepped through the archway, the orb's light illuminating the beginning of the passage. The runes on the archway pulsed with a pale blue light as he passed under them, and he felt a faint tingle, a sense of being scanned or acknowledged by the ancient system. The passage was indeed narrow, the walls smooth and cool, lined with the same pale blue glowing runes. It sloped downwards at a steady angle. The air was still and cold, the silence broken only by his footsteps and his own breathing. He walked for what felt like a long time. Minutes stretched into what could have been an hour or more. The passage continued its downward slope, winding and turning, offering no hint of its destination. The orb's light was a constant, steady presence, pushing back the absolute blackness ahead and behind him. He felt the physical strain returning. His legs ached, his head pounded with fatigue, and the residual cold of the void seemed to amplify the chill of the passage. Doubt began to creep in. Was this leading him anywhere, or just deeper into the earth, into another trap? He stopped, leaning against the smooth stone wall, trying to catch his breath. The pale blue runes glowed faintly around him, silent and enigmatic. He felt a strange presence here, different from the oppressive malice of the wellspring. It was ancient, watchful, perhaps even benevolent, but utterly alien. It was the presence of the weavers, the long-gone builders of this place. He closed his eyes again, focusing on the connection between the ember and the orb. He sought the subtle guidance that had led him here. It was still there, a faint pull leading him further down the passage. There was no turning back. He had to trust the connection, trust the orb, trust the ember. He pushed off the wall and continued his descent. The passage seemed endless. The sameness of the walls, the relentless downward slope, the profound silence, it began to wear on his mind. He fought against the rising tide of weariness and despair, clinging to the fragile hope of finding an exit. He thought of Ardoria above, of the encroaching shadow, the blighted lands of Vatia, the resilience of places like Ethelberg. He thought of the people who were suffering, who were waiting for the orb, waiting for hope. He couldn't fail them. He couldn't give up. He kept walking, putting one foot in front of the other, the orb a comforting weight in his hand, its light a defiant beacon. The passage twisted and turned, the air growing colder, the silence more absolute. Then, just as he felt his resolve beginning to fray, the passage opened out into a larger chamber. He stopped, the orb's light sweeping across the space. It was circular, smaller than the main wellspring cavern, but still sizable. The walls were lined with the same pale blue glowing runes, but here they were arranged in more complex patterns. geometric shapes interlocking with flowing lines. In the center of the chamber stood a structure. It was low and circular, made of the same black polished stone as the wellspring depression, but covered in the pale blue runes. It pulsed with a soft, steady light, a different rhythm than the orb or the wall runes. He approached the structure cautiously. It felt like an altar, or perhaps a control console of some kind. As he got closer, the runes on the structure flared, and he felt a strong resonance with the orb in his hands. It was as if the structure was recognizing the orb, reading it after millennia. He reached out and placed the orb on a flat, indented surface in the center of the structure. The moment the orb touched the surface, the pale blue runes on the structure and the walls of the chamber exploded with light, bathing the space in a brilliant, ethereal glow. The structure in the center began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that filled the chamber, not with sound, but with a vibration that resonated in his bones. The runes on the walls began to shift and rearrange themselves, flowing like liquid light, forming complex, three-dimensional patterns in the air around him. He watched in awe, the orb resting on the structure, its own white light mingling with the blue light of the chamber. He felt a surge of energy, not draining but connecting. He felt the ancient power of the weavers flowing around him, through the orb, through the ember within him. Images began to form in his mind, projected by the light patterns in the air. Not words, but concepts, feelings, flashes of history. He saw the weavers not as people, but as beings of light and energy, building this place, shaping the earth's energies. He saw the wellspring, a place of immense power, the heart of the world. He saw the shadow, a corrupting influence, slowly seeping into the world's heart. He saw the weavers fighting the shadow, not with weapons, but with light and energy, weaving intricate patterns of power. He saw them building the containment system, the wards, a last desperate act to protect the wellspring, to imprison the encroaching darkness. He saw the orb, not just an artifact, but a key, a focus, a lens for the primordial light. He saw it being hidden, separated from the wellspring, waiting for a time when it would be needed again. And he saw the ember, not just a spark, but a resonance, a connection to the ancient light, passed down through generations, waiting for the right time, the right person, to reunite with the orb. The images coalesced, forming a clearer picture. This chamber wasn't just a passage. It was a control chamber. A place where the weavers had monitored and managed the energies of the wellspring, and where they had perhaps left a way to interact with the containment system. The orb on the structure wasn't just resting, it was interfacing. It was communicating with the ancient machinery, with the very essence of the wards. He felt the resonance deepen. The orb was showing him the system, explaining its functions through the light patterns and the intuitive connection. The wards were absolute, designed to contain the void within the main cavern. They could not be opened from the outside without immense power, power the shadow now possessed, but was trapped away from the doors. But there was another function, a way to interact with the system, not to open the main containment, but to redirect power to access other parts of the complex, perhaps even a transport system. The light patterns shifted, focusing on a new set of runes that appeared on the far side of the chamber wall, opposite the passage he had entered through. These runes were different, more complex, arranged in a circular pattern. They pulsed with a rapid rhythmic beat, like a waiting heart. He felt the guidance again, stronger this time. This was the way out. Not back through the sealed doors, but forward through another part of the ancient complex. He carefully lifted the orb from the structure. The brilliant light in the chamber dimmed slightly, but the pale blue runes on the walls and the structure remained lit, pulsing with a softer glow. The humming lessened, but did not cease entirely. The orb felt different in his hands now, not just powerful, but aware. It felt like a partner. He walked towards the circular pattern of runes on the far wall, the orb's light leading the way. As he approached, the runes brightened, their rhythmic pulsing intensifying. He placed the orb against the center of the circular pattern. The wall dissolved, not physically, but as if reality itself bent and shimmered. The stone became translucent, then vanished entirely, replaced by a swirling vortex of pale blue light. It was not a passage, but a gateway, a portal. He felt no wind, no sound, just the intense, swirling energy and a sense of being pulled forward. This was a Weaver transport, a method of instantaneous travel through the complex. He looked back at the control structure, at the passage he had come through, now just an archway in the glowing wall. He was leaving the wellspring cavern, leaving the immediate vicinity of the contained void. He didn't know where this portal led, but it was his chance, his only chance. With a deep breath, gripping the orb tightly, Caitlin stepped into the swirling blue light. The sensation was instantaneous and disorienting. He felt himself dissolve and reform, the world twisting around him in a blur of blue light and energy. There was a brief moment of absolute nothingness, a sensation of being suspended outside of time and space, and then, abruptly, he was somewhere else. He stumbled forward, landing on solid ground. The swirling blue light behind him snapped shut with a soft pop, the wall solidifying instantly, leaving no trace of the gateway. He was in another chamber, different from the ones he had left. This one was smaller, more enclosed, the walls lined with the same pale blue runes, but here they were calmer, glowing with a soft ambient light. The air was warmer, less stagnant. He could hear a faint, rhythmic dripping sound from somewhere in the distance. He was no longer in the profound silence of the wellspring complex. He looked around. The chamber was empty, save for a single, massive stone door set into the far wall, different from the sealed doors of the wellspring cavern. These doors were plain, unadorned by runes, simply solid stone. He approached them cautiously. They felt different. They weren't radiating the power of the containment wards. Like normal doors, albeit very large, very heavy normal doors. He pushed against one of them. It didn't budge. He tried again, putting his shoulder into it. Still nothing. They were sealed, but perhaps just physically, not magically. He looked at the orb in his hands. Its light was steady, its connection to the ember a constant presence. Could the orb open these doors, or was its power limited to the Weaver complex? He placed his hand on the stone surface of the door, holding the orb against it. He focused, trying to channel the energy, to find a resonance, a key. Nothing happened. The doors remained stubbornly shut. Frustration pricked at him. He had escaped the immediate prison, only to find himself in another, smaller one. He stepped back, scanning the chamber. Was there a mechanism, a lever, another set of runes? The walls were smooth, the runes passive. There was nothing obvious. He felt the familiar tendrils of despair trying to coil around his thoughts. Another dead end. You're just delaying the inevitable. He shook his head fiercely, gripping the orb tighter. He wouldn't give in. He wouldn't surrender to the silent whispers of the shadow. He had come too far. He took a few steps back and looked up, scanning the ceiling. It was high above, lost in shadow, but he thought he saw faint lines, different from the wall runes. He raised the orb, directing its beam upwards. The ceiling was carved with a vast, intricate pattern, a celestial map, perhaps, or a diagram of the world's energies. And woven into the pattern were runes, but these were smaller, different in shape, glowing with a faint, golden light. He felt a sense of recognition, not from the ember or the orb, but from within himself, a faint echo of Alara's teachings. These weren't Weaver runes. These were directional, navigational. He focused the orb's light on the ceiling pattern, letting its beam trace the golden runes. As the light passed over them, they pulsed, responding. The orb seemed to understand them, translating their meaning directly into his mind. The runes spoke of paths, of connections, of places above. They were a map, not of the physical space, but of the energy flows, the ley lines of Ardoria, and they showed a path, a specific convergence of energy leading from this chamber towards the surface. The orb wasn't just a key to the Weaver's power. It was also a guide connected to the very fabric of the world, or at least the world as the Weavers had understood it. The golden runes indicated a specific point on the massive stone doors. It wasn't a lock, not a mechanism. It was a point of resonance, a place where the energy of the passage intersected with the energy flow leading outwards. He lowered the orb, his eyes fixed on the spot on the doors indicated by the runes. He walked towards it, his heart pounding with renewed hope. He reached out and placed the orb against the stone surface at that precise point. This time there was an immediate reaction. The stone under the orb's touch warmed slightly, and a low, grinding sound began, coming from within the doors themselves. The runes on the ceiling flared with golden light, and he felt a powerful surge of energy flow from the orb into the doors. The massive stone doors began to move, grinding slowly inwards, revealing a dark passage beyond. The air flowing from this new passage was different. It was cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something that felt like the outside world. He didn't hesitate. He snatched the orb from the door, its light still brilliant, and stepped through the opening. The doors continued to grind open behind him, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel, unlike the smooth, runland passages of the Weaver complex. This tunnel felt natural, or at least less artificial. The walls were damp earth and rock, the air cool and carrying the faint scent of growing things. It sloped upwards gently but persistently. He was no longer in the heart of the murk of Zyre, no longer in the ancient prison of the shadow. He was in a passage leading upwards towards the surface. Relief washed over him, so potent it almost made his knees buckle. He was out. He had found a way. He began to walk, moving faster now, driven by the urgency to reach the surface, to find Lissa, Bram, and Ilara, to bring the orb back to Ardoria. The tunnel was long and winding, but the upward slope was a constant reassurance. The orb's light guided him, steady and unwavering. He thought of the others. Where had they gone? Had they made it back to Ethelberg? Were they even still in the murk? He hoped they were safe, making their way back, perhaps trying to figure out how to breach the impenetrable wards to free him. He had to reach them. The orb was powerful, but he couldn't carry the weight of Ardoria's fate alone. He needed his friends. He needed their strength, their knowledge, their unwavering belief in him. He walked for what felt like hours, the tunnel seeming endless, the upward slope a constant drain on his dwindling energy. His body ached, his mind was weary, but the hope of reaching the surface, of seeing the sky again, kept him going. The air gradually grew fresher, the scent of earth giving way to something lighter, something that hinted at the open air. He heard sounds, faint at first, then growing louder, the scuttling of unseen creatures, the whisper of wind, the distant call of a bird, sounds he hadn't heard in the profound silence beneath the earth. He saw it ahead, a faint gray light, different from the pure white of the orb or the pale blue of the Weaver runes. It was the light of dawn. He quickened his pace, stumbling in his eagerness. The tunnel opened out into a narrow crevice between rocks, and he emerged blinking into the gray light of early morning. He was on the surface, not in the murk of Zyre, not in the shifting sands or the desolate plains. He was in a rocky, desolate landscape, but it was the surface. He could feel the cool breeze on his face, smell the faint scent of hardy desert plants. He looked up at the sky. It was a pale, bruised gray, heavy with clouds, but it was the sky. He could see the vast, empty expanse above him. He was free. He sank to his knees again, the rough ground digging into his palms. He held the orb up towards the sky, its brilliant white light a stark contrast to the gray dawn. It had worked. The ember, the orb, the ancient knowledge, they had guided him, given him strength, shown him a way out of the deepest darkness. But where was he, and where were his friends? The landscape was unfamiliar, rocky and barren, scattered with stunted, wind-battered vegetation. He saw no signs of recent travel, no footprints, no trails. He was somewhere in the vast, treacherous murk of Zyre, but far from the wellspring, far from the known paths. He rose to his feet, the orb still clutched in his hand. The journey wasn't over. He had the orb, but he was alone, lost in the heart of the wastes. He needed to find his friends. He needed to find his way back to Ardoria. The shadow of Silok was still spreading across Phexia. The year 1842 marked the intensification of its power, and time was running out. The orb was his only weapon, his only hope. He looked to rising sun, a faint promise of light behind the heavy clouds. He had faced the deepest darkness and emerged. Now he had to face the wastes, find his way back, and confront the encroaching gloom that threatened to engulf Ardoria. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool, fresh air fill his lungs. It was the air of the surface, the air of the living world. He held the orb high, letting its light illuminate the desolate landscape around him. He was exhausted, injured, and alone, but he had the orb, he had the ember, and he had a path forward. He began to walk, picking a direction, any direction, guided only by the faint hope that it would lead him back to his friends, back to Ethelberg, back to the fight for Ardoria. The orb pulsed in his hand, a silent companion, a symbol of the ancient light that refused to be extinguished. The journey back to the light had just begun, and the murk of Zyre stretched before him, vast, silent, and full of unknown danger.